Hello and good afternoon and welcome to Cyberfest 21, the Northeast's biggest cybersecurity festival. My name is Phil Jackman and it's great to see you all here, and apologies for some of you who already joined a little earlier. I think we had a little technical hiccup. We seem to have every technical hiccup that you could possibly have throughout these events, but that's the way the modern world. Claire is going to put some slides on, and I'm going to talk you a bit of an introduction into Cyber North and what we do here, and we'll take that from here. So, as I said, welcome. This is the 13th event out of 14 in the festival, so we're getting quite good at it, and tomorrow is the final event, and I hope to see you there. It's at the John Marley Centre in Newcastle, and we hope to see you there with some beer and pizzas, and there's a chance to see the artwork from the Cyber Eyes Wide Open project. So if you're around, please come down. So this is the format for this afternoon, a little introduction from myself, and then unfortunately, Abby Moffat, who was going to speak, has come down with the virus and is unable to talk, and some good people have stepped in. Lucy Batley, Traction Industries, and Jonny Green from the North East Regional Special Operations Unit, and they're going to talk about the issues facing children and young people online. Then we've got a presentation from Mimi Theobald, who's an aspiring solicitor, to talk about our children and young people, particularly vulnerable cyber threats. And then Alex Craig, partner at Muckle LLP, is going to talk to us about some specific technical aspects of children's code and age-appropriate design code. And then we'll have a chat, a conversation led by my good friend and fellow Dynamo North East employee, Dawn Dunn. And then we'll come back on that. So next slide, please, Claire. So a little bit about Cyber North. Cyberfest is brought to you by Cyber North, Dynamo's cybersecurity cluster for the North East region. We're supported by Accenture and the Innovation Super Network, and we're eternally grateful for their continuing support, without which we couldn't put these events on. So we're recognised by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and indeed we may have a brief introduction to Andrew Elliott, the Deputy Director for Cybersecurity from DCMS. He's going to be online, and we may get hear a few words from later on today. So that could be exciting. So recognised by them and the National Cybersecurity Centre as representing the region. So also members of the UK Cyber Cluster Collaboration, or UKC3, which does what it says on the tin, and I'll come back to that in a minute, and Global EPIC, an international collaboration of cybersecurity clusters. So local, regional, national, and international presence. So we're working to grow the industry across the region to position as a great place to do cybersecurity business in all that entails. We're working to grow jobs, highly skilled, well-paid, and interesting jobs. And we're doing this in 4 ways. The first is we're making a lot of noise, trying to raise awareness, increase self-belief in the region, and we do this through a whole series of events, including culminating in Cyberfest. We've certainly made a lot of progress in this area, I'm happy to announce. The second thing that we're doing is we're trying to help existing businesses to grow in a collaborative yet competitive framework and allow them to work together to pitch for much broader and much wider business, so national and international business. There's about 70 companies in cybersecurity in the region. We want to help them to grow. The next thing we're going to do, or the next thing we are doing, is trying to develop new businesses. So we've created a concept of a cyber innovation centre in the region, or CAIN. We're working with Newcastle University, Accenture, and Plexel, who run Lorca in London, which is something similar to what we're trying to do. A business case is with DCMS now and central government, other departments, and we're just waiting to see if some funding can be made available. But I think everybody in central government's waiting to see if funding is going to be available. And the fourth thing that we're doing is we're trying to address the skill shortage in the cybersecurity sector. We're trying to support young people and those people who are looking to change their careers into the cybersecurity sector. So we undertook a large piece of work earlier this year, again with the support of DCMS, and we're working on the plan to address skills as soon as Cyberfest is over. Next slide, please, Claire. So I said I'd come back to UKC3. The UK Cyber Cluster Collaboration is bringing all of the UK cyber clusters together. This is an exciting new venture, and we do that following a process of recognition. So there are about 20, I think, clusters in the country that we're aware of. They're all doing something similar, all doing something slightly different. And the idea is to help bring that together and share best practice or share good practice and learn from each other. Cyber North, I'm pleased to say, is one of the clusters that's been recognised. I think there's 9 so far, so we've got a bit of work to do. And together we're going to look at 3 areas: ecosystem development, innovation, and skills. And that very much reflects the work that Cyber North is doing. We've got some money from DCMS, and Cyber North has got some money on the back of that for the rest of this year, and we're going to use that to build a small team to help us get a better understanding of the market, engage with the market better, and give ourselves a much clearer direction of how we're going to take Cyber North forward. Final slide from me then, Claire. As you can see, there's a lot going on at Cyber North. If you're involved in the region's cybersecurity sector in any way, please join us and be part of it. Thank you very much. Right, now, my two best new friends, Lucy and Jonny, who really saved me on Monday when Abby said that unfortunately she couldn't make it today. A few phone calls later, and Lucy and Jonny are here, who are going to talk to us about the issues faced by children and young people in cybersecurity. Who are they?
Great, thanks Phil. Good afternoon everyone. My name's Lucy Batley. I am the founder and owner of a software IT consultancy business called Traction Industries, and this is my esteemed colleague on this panel, mini panel. Jonny, just want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jonny Green. I'm a cyber protect officer in the North East Regional Special Operations Unit. Basically, our primary goal is to engage with businesses and communities, provide national advice and guidance. We're one of the trusted partners of the NCSC. And to be honest, what we want to try and do is reduce the chances of people becoming a victim of cybercrime. That is our primary goal.
Brilliant. So what we wanted to do today, we've got about 20 minutes. We're going to have a very informal chat. But basically, I was going to share a couple of stories about we've been victims of cyber attack, my daughter in particular. So I was just going to share that experience with everyone and get some feedback off Jonny about what he thinks about it and basically what we can do to prevent and protect. So basically, I've got an 8-year-old daughter called Betsy, and she's developed into a teenager during lockdown because I'm working from home. I've had to kind of stick her in a room with a computer. She's become, I was going to use the word obsessed, but she uses a couple of games, Minecraft and Roblox. She uses on a very regular basis daily. And we had a problem a couple of months ago that, so my daughter basically has her own iPad. And I've got family sharing on, so if she needs to buy or download any apps, she has to get my password. So she'll load up what she wants and then comes and gets a password from me. So does this quite regularly with Pocket Money. She buys credits on Roblox, so she can buy virtual, basically you pay physical pounds to buy virtual credits inside the game. As a good parent, we've been quite protective in terms of Minecraft. We've got it closed so she can only play on it with her friends. So we thought we were being quite clever with that. However, a few months ago, one Saturday, as usual, she said, could she use her pocket money to buy some credits on Roblox? She loaded it up, I put my password in. Monday morning, I booted up my computer and I had something like 65 emails, which were all receipts from iTunes. And basically we'd been scammed. Somebody had hacked into it, and I think it was about £660 worth of fraudulent credits were purchased on my credit card, which was incredibly stressful and incredibly difficult to get the money back. iTunes were brilliant. I have to say the bank wasn't particularly good. What I was going to ask you though, Jonny, is what could I have done anything further to prevent that, and how can we kind of safeguard and protect kids? And the reason I'm asking that is because I like to think myself running an IT company that I'm reasonably tech savvy. So what can people do to protect themselves?
Yeah, Lucy, you're absolutely right there. Case of it doesn't matter whether or not you're tech savvy or not. Any kind of situation, if it catches you at the right time for the right reasons, anybody could be victims of a fraud or a scam. I know earlier on in Cyberfest they were talking exactly about this and not potentially using the word scam because everybody receives them, but it's all around about the settings and things like that. But how that happened, without obviously knowing a bit more detail, how they got your details, I'm not fully aware of. But it's about, if they are possible, a lot of sites enable two-factor authentication. So if you've given somebody your username and password, if they've got that two-factor authentication, at least then you're getting something on your phone that you have to authorize rather than someone getting your details. There's been lots of stories around that happening in the past, where people have been hit with hundreds, £1,000 bills through in-app purchases. So it's making sure that actually, if you've on your settings, like you've already done, that they can't just go away and purchase things, is that then require the password for every single purchase that they make. Otherwise, those could mount up, even if you authorize it for half an hour. Obviously, young children, they don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize that money, those purchases, are having to come from somewhere. But exactly as you're saying, is at what point do we start teaching them that? Because I've got 2 young children myself, one's 6, one's 2, and the 2-year-old sees the 6-year-old using the iPad and is already pressing buttons. Anyone who's got young children will have seen it already. They go to the TV screens and they're swiping up and they're trying to press buttons because they think everything's touch screen. So they see these things, but at what point do we start teaching them what they can and can't do on the iPads, and how do we actually create those lessons for them?
So we were talking about this earlier in terms of you can't. So Betsy's dad asked me to put a block on Google to prevent her looking at certain things. And I said, you just it's not as simple as that. You can't do that. And even if you do put security settings and parental controls, there's no reason that it's nothing stopping her to go to someone else's house and look on a different computer that hasn't got those settings. So we were talking earlier about it's that education piece, and it's like twofold in terms of so the way I tell my daughter is, particularly on Google, on the internet, it's the world's at your fingertips. You can look for absolutely anything. Is there a fine balance between educating particularly kids and young adults who are vulnerable to things like grooming, etc., or how much by saying don't Google seeing a man having his head chopped off by a terrorist would raise their curiosity? So there's kind of a fine balance between protecting your kids and educating them, and also giving them the freedom and the power to be able to go off and do their own thing.
Well, and the thing is, when we always say this around about education of cybersecurity in schools, the kids have been brought up with technology, and for most parents, they will know more about the technology they're using than the parents do. So if the kids really want to do something on the internet, you're saying talking about blocking Google, they will find a way to do it, whether or not that's installing software, VPNs, anything like that. They will find a way, and even if they don't, their friends will, and they will tell them to do that. So I think we do have to educate them. Obviously, this is what we're saying is everyone knows their own children, and whether or not you think, well, if we tell them not to do something, are they specifically going and try and do that straight away? But what we're saying is, from a technology point of view, can we really stop them doing it? And I don't think we can. So education and having those conversations with our children is the only way to do it. To realize that actually not everyone is going to be out there is who they say they are. People set up accounts just because they see an account of a girl of a similar age doesn't mean that it is necessarily a girl of a similar age. And what we were saying is all children, they face all the same risks as what adults do online, and then some, because exactly as you were touching on there, it's the grooming element. So they need to be aware of saying, well, would you go and talk to a stranger in the street? No. So why would you do it online? And trying to relay that message that actually, yes, it's digital and you've got the whole world at your tips, but it's just like the physical world.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the specific example we had was, you hit the nail on the head before about your 2 kids kind of emulating each other and copying behaviors. So she was using TikTok, and she was seeing all these teenagers doing quite provocative, sexy dancing, and she was copying it and then putting makeup filters on. And it was almost like a kind of a red rag to a bull for a groomer. So we sat down and talked to her about it and explained why, and explained that some kids online might not be kids and that they might be adults. And she understood that and turned the account off. However, it is a fine balance of being overly protective and overly controlling, but also helping children to understand, because like Betsy picked up on it and she's quite well educated, and got that straight away. But I can imagine that there's a lot of very, very vulnerable kids, and particularly teenagers, who are victims of cyberbullying and cyber attacks. And it's quite hard to know, a bit like the real world, it's quite hard to know when people are goodies and baddies, isn't it?
Yeah, and when it's a case of you talking there about a case of the online bullying and things like that, I think one of the problems with the internet and social media is, whereas before, if children were physically getting bullied in school or anything like that, at the end of the day, they could come away from it. They knew they would be safe at home, but because they are all online now, then there's no escape from that break, because anything that they put online, other people will see. Even if they don't put things online, they'll see what the friends are putting online, and it could be hurtful. But it's obviously, fortunately, we're not at that stage yet. But the kind of message that I would like to deliver to my children is, if they wouldn't do something in front of me and wouldn't show me what it is, don't put it online. But that's easier said than done.
Yeah, like we were saying before, the scamming is very, very clever now. It's very high level, and I was saying earlier that I'm tech savvy, but we still got scammed. It's very difficult to spot. So do you have any tips in terms of trust your gut? If it doesn't look or feel right, it probably isn't right? Or is there any particular things that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, well, exactly. It's the same advice as we would give to children as we would give to adults. Is the take 5 advice, is that if you receive something, is to trust your instinct. If something doesn't feel right, you don't have to respond to it. If you receive something saying you owe money or we have this, wait 5 minutes. Don't respond straight away, because if you take a step away, the issue is still going to be there when you return to it, but at least then you kind of cleared your mind as to think, well, is this real? Is it not? We talk about educating children around not speaking to people that don't know online, but do we actually tell them what a strong password is from a very early age? Do we tell them about how to spot a fake website? So the fact that you might have google.scam.com is a subdomain of scam.com, whereas scam.google.com is a subdomain of google.com. But that starts to get a bit complicated. So it's all about age appropriate advice. There's a website, Internet Matters, which again, they provide a lot of advice and guidance, which is age appropriate advice for young children. And they break it up into small groups. So for your 5 to 7 year olds, 7 to so I'm just reading the comment there from Stuart Smiles. Strong passwords are not going to be the answers. There's no one answer to all of these problems, apart from the fact that most of them come under this education. We've got to educate our children about the risks and the dangers online, whether or not that is being scammed, whether or not that's being from groomers, or whether or not that's actually them, as they get older and they develop cybersecurity skills, using those skills in the wrong manner. There's unfortunately not a magic wand, so we just have to respond to that. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there because I
it's all right. You're right. It is a massively complex issue, and the example you gave me before, Jimmy, I can't remember his name. He's a professional scammer, and he got
yes.
scammed.
So it was Jim Browning. He's got a YouTube channel. He scams the scammers, and he's hacked into the school network. So I say the school networks, it's because we're talking about kids. He's hacked into the scammers networks over in India, and he hacked into the CCTV. He was downloading the contents from their machines and things like that. And recently, even he's been scammed, and he put it on to say that this is what we were saying right at the beginning: the right situation at the right time. Anybody could fall victim. So this is what the education needs to come around, and people need to know that case. If you do fall victim, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's just something that's happened, but they need to let people know. They need to report it when the situation's right. Either that to reporting it to family members, somebody in authority, or if it's a scam, action fraud.
Okay. And what's going on in the schools? Do you physically go into schools and teach kids what they should be looking out for, or do the schools have a responsibility to do that? What's the setup within the education institutions?
Yeah, so occasionally we'll go out. At my role at the region, we tend to focus on businesses, but the schools do go out. There's the risk because the way that kind of works is things are split into cyber enabled, cyber dependent. And I know as a member of the public, people are not really bothered what's cyber enabled and what's cyber dependent. But obviously the schools, that education has been out there for a long time. There is things available. Schools give messages out. I know neighborhood policing teams sometimes go into schools, but it is all changing all the time. So the risks, it needs to be constant. But I know that they are doing work around that of what the right advice and guidance is to give to schools to try and keep it relevant for as long as possible.
I think that's important as well, because it has to be relevant, and because technology is moving so fast, it's going to be changing on a daily basis. Google changed their criteria on a daily basis. I'm sure the way that innovation evolves is going to be really difficult. So it's quite hard just to keep up with the pace of that as well, then, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the social media platforms, they do put things in place to try and reduce the risk of these things. But for example, I think it was still Facebook, where you have to be 13 or over to create a Facebook account. But the kids are still well, maybe it's not on Facebook, because apparently that's for the oldies now, which I don't think it is, because obviously I'm on there. But
we were chatting this morning about Facebook's just being blocked. Well, they've paused releasing the Instagram for under 13-year-olds. So Instagram's owned by Facebook.
Yeah.
I was just reading a bit about it before we came on. The Wall Street Journal allegedly have said that Facebook's own internal research found Instagram harmful for young users, especially teenage girls. So by their own admission, they're saying that Facebook's not a platform. So if they're stopping the under 13s version of it, and they're not doing that, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
So you're forcing kids to go into an adult environment.
Yeah. But the kids are going to do that anyway, and
exactly, they're going to do it anyway.
And even if they broke it down into, say, Instagram adults and Instagram children, they're not going to do that. A case of even just the streaming services like Netflix, where you can reduce the age appropriation of the content that they show, but the kids don't necessarily, once they get to a certain age, don't want to watch just those programs. They want to watch the next older things, and
they want to be like the older kids as well. They want to they want to emulate their big brothers and sisters and emulate the teenagers, and, you know. It's that aspirational bit of you always want to be more grown up when you're a kid.
Oh, of course you do. And we're talking about a case of the innocent, Dawn's put in the chat, what about innocent data collecting and collection, fund Facebook, the surveys, all those different things. As we said previously, it's all the same issues that the kids face, the adults face, the kids face, and everything that they face in the real world is the same problems that they're going to face in the digital world, and potentially more. So when we're trying to think about, well, how can we protect them, as we said earlier, there's no magic wand that's going to be able to solve all these problems. And I dare say, a case of, if we continue, we could talk about this for another 2 hours, never mind another 20 minutes. We could probably spend 2 days trying to look at these problems, and at this time we're never going to come up with a concrete solution, because there's no magic wand. But the education of the children, we know that is the key.
I agree with that.
So I think that's a perfect time for me to step in. That was the fastest 20 minutes I've ever seen in my life, and you're absolutely right. I think the problem was keeping you to time rather than running out of time.
Definitely, Phil.
So thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you very much, Jonny. If you could hang around for the Dawn section at the end, that'd be great. But I think one of the key messages that's come out of this for me is, Lucy, you are somebody who's in tech, but you're talking about this, and I think people need to talk about when they're scammed, get people to realize that these things go on and affect all of us, and that's the best way to go forward. So thank you very much. And thank you. Our next speaker maybe Theobald, I think you're going to talk about, are children and young people particularly vulnerable to cyber threat? Are you there, Mimi?
Yes, hi. Yeah, thanks, Phil. So yeah, I'm Mimi. Just a bit about me. I graduated from the University of St Andrews in 2020, and I studied international relations. And I did my dissertation on the potential negative impact of cyber insecurity on democracy, with a specific focus on the 2016 US election, which has sort of ignited my interest in the subject, and it's sort of why I'm here talking all today. I then spent the last year studying the graduate diploma in law, and I'm currently looking at applying to law firms that have a specific interest on cybersecurity. But more now on the actual topic of discussion. For the talk, I'm basically trying to answer the question, are children particularly vulnerable online? It was being reported that around 95% of children and young people use the internet in developed countries. So it's important to investigate the threat levels that these children are exposed to online in order to understand the impact that being exposed to the internet and its potential risks can have on their development and lives. According to the Council of Communications and Media, adolescents are connected to social media at a time when their levels of social and emotional development leave them vulnerable to peer pressure, and when they have a limited capacity to self-regulate, meaning that their pro-social and academic benefits of online interactions coincide with exposure to potential risks and safety concerns about their use. So this talk is going to try and aim sort of to analyze this interaction and this, what I think is quite a big assumption, in an attempt to kind of answer this question. So just briefly about how I want to kind of shape this talk. I'm going to start with a brief overview of definitions of key terms, so sort of include discussion on what vulnerable means and what threat means and risk means, with a close focus on the work of Sonia Livingston, who is a quite key scholar in this field. I then want to move on to discuss several key studies to highlight the level of threat that children experience online. So for this particular section, I want to focus on cyberbullying, mainly just because that's the area that I'm primarily interested in. But also it appears to be one of the areas that I found a lot more sort of statistical research and evidence on. And then I want to kind of compare and contrast with different vulnerable groups and sort of the literature surrounding them. So I think that's kind of important to really understand and highlight this question of, are children particularly vulnerable? So I'm going to really focus here on sort of those with intellectual disabilities and the elderly or older adults, as they've also been referred to in the literature. And this comparison, I'm going to try and kind of pick up on a common theme, which sort of I think seems to run throughout literature, which also was sort of I think touched on earlier. And it's sort of, is it important to power and educate members of vulnerable groups rather than regulate and monitor them really intensely? And so that's going to kind of hopefully lead me into a brief discussion on the protective language that surrounds cyber threats and how best to monitor them. And I want to kind of highlight here conflicting views between feeling the need to protect vulnerable groups, especially children, with the need for them to build resilience through their experiences. And I hope to sort of highlight a notion of maybe there's a sort of generation and maybe digital literacy gap as well. So yeah, so starting off with definitions. I think a key definition is what I mean when I say children and young people. For the purposes of this talk, the age range I'm kind of really referring to is sort of 17 to 18, as this seems to be where most of the research is centered. And then in terms of vulnerability, I think there are lots of different definitions of this. And in terms of a more sort of technical definition and more specific to online, the National Cybersecurity Centre defined vulnerability as a weakness in an IT system that can be exploited by an attacker to deliver a successful attack. They can occur through flaws, features, or user error, and attackers will look to exploit any of them, often combining one or more to achieve their goal. Although this is an interesting and it's an important thing to understand and know, it's not really the definition that I'll adopt throughout this talk, as we'll be focusing more on internet users themselves and sort of the vulnerabilities, if you like, within them. And therefore, when referring to vulnerability, I'll be referring to the concept of potential exposure to harm through online threats. Indeed, the term vulnerability has been known to be actually quite problematic itself, as it implies that there's a limited level of control over the exposure to the potential harm. So when referring to children in this language, it can actually be quite harmful and can potentially take away from children's agency, as it seems that they don't have any control over their actions, can make them seem weak and in need of protection. And so when considering the interaction between children and young people online, the primary concept is how can we protect them and what can we do to keep them on safe, which is, what everyone's worried about. But there's also the other side, that this could potentially be quite a damaging narrative, because it can prevent children from certain positive experiences and opportunities through giving them the freedom online. And sort of also, there's also the importance of allowing them to develop resilience, which is something that a lot of developmental psychologists talk about. And this is the point that I'm going to talk on a lot later. And there have also been potential thoughts about human rights perspective, and whether through limiting children's opportunities and access to the internet in a way to protect them, whether this actually can sort of diminish their equality. And then risk is sort of, according to Livingston and Hansen, is where we refer to what we mean is that it's being exposed to something like pornography online is a risk, in a sense that it's associated with a certain likelihood and magnitude of harm, similar to the idea of vulnerability. So it's important, however, to note that the identification of online risk does not imply that harm will follow, and not all users will be equally affected. So there's a tendency for media outlets to catastrophize the risk and threat to children online, creating panic which internalizes this narrative that children are extremely vulnerable. Indeed, when considering risk, it's important to note that there is actually a level of control here. As Beck, another academic, has stated, that online risk does not arise inevitably, but as a result of human design. And as such, we introduce risk management, which can be both proactive and reactive. However, due to the age range of children, they need to protect them. The association of children and risk is seen as unacceptable, meaning that the current notion surrounding children online is that they should not be able to formulate this risk analysis because they're too vulnerable to be exposed to such a threat and risk. So this kind of highlights the complex and slightly circular issues when considering the vulnerability of children online. So to get more straight into it, and how vulnerable really are children, I'm going to start by looking at the cyber threat and of cyberbullying. And this is going to be the main focus of this section. So Michelle Ham carried out a cross-analysis between 36 studies and 34 publications, with a primary focus on children between the ages of 12 and 18 years of age. And in this study, they found, as a median average, about 23% of respondents had found to have experienced bullying online through social media. MB Stanbrook then stated that cyberbullying gives individuals the means to extend face-to-face bullying within the online environment, where actions on anonymity, actions can reach people and be more permanent. And additionally, online bullying creates a certain level of anonymity, which can intensify the fear and anxiety that surrounds being a victim, creating sort of more impact and potentially a more intense response than traditional forms of bullying. And although some can argue that 23% is not particularly high, the concept of increased intensity and impact of children would seem to enhance their vulnerability. And Ham's research also found that one third of the respondents who experienced cyberbullying experienced increased levels of anxiety independent from the effect of bullying at school, sort of supporting Stanbrook's theory that cyberbullying has more intense impacts, and so suggesting that children are particularly vulnerable to experiencing harm online. Ham also found that there was a consistent relationship between cyberbullying and depression among children and adolescents. However, there were some inconsistencies when generalizing to other mental health conditions, suggesting more research needs to be done in this area to gain a better understanding of the impacts of cyberbullying on the mental health and well-being of children. But there is a lot of support for the idea that cyberbullying has more intense repercussions than traditional bullying, which would then extend the idea that children are particularly vulnerable online. More academic research done by Tracy Valancourt carried out a study into the implications of cyberbullying in children. And they concluded that cyberbullying, while following many of the underlying dynamics or more traditional forms of bullying, features some unique qualities that can both magnify the damage caused and make it more difficult to detect. So these features include the pervasive, never-ending nature of cyberbullying and the ability to quickly reach large audiences, and the potential for anonymity and the related distance afforded by screens and devices compared to in-person interaction allow the cruelty of cyberbullying to go unchecked. However, other studies have shown that, in fact, the majority of children receiving inappropriate and hurtful messages online knew that the person sending them. This would then suggest that actually the anonymity may not quite be as prevalent as some studies are suggesting. Another academic, Laffman et al., in a study carried out on Swedish children between the ages of 15 and 18, found that being a victim of cyberbullying was associated to poorer physical health, such as headaches and stomach aches. And in another study on children in America in the grades of 6 to 12, Giometti and Kalowski found that cyberbullying uniquely predicted academic problems such as greater absenteeism and poor grades. Furthermore, Parents found that cyberbullies experienced a significant amount of unique variance in depression when controlling for traditional forms of bullying, suggesting that cyberbullying has unique implications on children that can be more severe than traditional forms. And as such, the protective narrative that surrounds this whole idea could actually be seen as more important, and the responses of media outlets, which are seen to catastrophize and sort of worried parents and adults, etc., are actually potentially more likely to be justified when you actually really look at the statistics and the impact of them. So yeah, all of this research would seem to conclude that yes, children are very vulnerable to cyber threats due to the intensity of the harm in which they can experience. However, the level of harm experienced is not the same across the board. It does vary from child to child and varying on the context. And also the type of cyber threats, it does vary. Earlier they were talking about financial scams and that impact, which might impact a child differently to sort of more personal forms of harm and threat, such as cyberbullying. So I think that does then adjust how you would approach this question as to whether they are particularly vulnerable. But to address that further, I think we also need to discuss, contrast with some different vulnerable groups. So I'm going to start with looking at those with intellectual disabilities. And Puchel and Scholar have said that a core narrative surrounding people with intellectual disabilities is that of being eternal children with increased vulnerability. Therefore, initially, it would suggest that those with intellectual disabilities are in fact more vulnerable online than children. However, due to the narrative that people with intellectual disabilities are similar to children, the literature on the topic highlights similar categories and approaches. For example, Livingston and Haddon's framework suggesting that the primary threats of children online are exposure to harmful, manipulative, or exploitative content, experiencing negative contact online, and engaging in criminal and antisocial behavior or conduct has been attached to that of people with intellectual disabilities. So as a result of that similarity in the narrative, we can be more likely to assume that their levels of vulnerability are actually very similar. So I guess that could be said to further decrease the notion that children are particularly vulnerable. But another scholar, Chadwick, has stated that the primary risk for those with intellectual disabilities is digital exclusion, so the lack of access to the internet. And he states that because of their disability, those with intellectual disabilities are less likely to be given support system that's required to access the internet, and creating a greater risk to their well-being, as many services such as banking, access to health, social care and welfare systems are increasingly being accessed online, particularly in the wake of the pandemic. So he states that if people with intellectual disabilities are to become full members of society, they also need access to digital technology. which would then suggest that the narrative of vulnerability for this particular group can be quite harmful because it limits their access and inclusion within society, which can then lead to experiences of isolation and loneliness, which can negatively impact their well-being, and so seemingly creating more harm. Additionally, Chadwick's found that members of the general population without disabilities rate people with intellectual disabilities at greater risk of experiencing online threats than any other group, suggesting that they are actually more vulnerable than children online. And another quantitative investigation by Loughran Martinson on professional and parent views on the internet for the use of purposes of love and sex found that young people with intellectual disabilities were viewed as more vulnerable than other people, suggesting that they are, in fact, as I said, more vulnerable than young people and children. However, in this study, it was actually found that parents and carers found that it was actually also inappropriate for children with intellectual disabilities to access the internet, which then also kind of reinforces this idea of digital exclusion and the idea of the negative impacts on that. And there have been many, many other studies. For example, Loff and Fisher, they did a comparison of 102 pairs of people with Williams syndrome, which is an intellectual disability, and compared them with their parents. And they found that parents reported high vulnerability, whereas those with the actual disability said that they felt completely safe online. So this kind of enforces this idea of a potential generation gap, whereas the elder population feel like those who are younger than them or seemingly more vulnerable than them are actually at a greater risk online. But this might not in reality be the case. And further research by Wright in a survey on young autistic people found that those with intellectual disabilities found that cyber victimization was associated positively with anxiety, depression, and loneliness, which supports this, similar to that of young children I described earlier. But then they also said that it was supported by parental mediation of technology use and the protective narrative and stopping them from accessing various stuff online had also negative impacts because it prevented them from gaining new experiences and sort of undermining their skill development, self-determination, and digital participation, which sort of further highlights this potential disconnect that's perceived as good protective strategies by those caring for people with intellectual disabilities and what might actually be best for them, as well as the conflicting views on research in this field, sort of further enhancing the running themes surrounding this, this need to protect people online. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking at this, it's sort of quite hard to see who's more vulnerable, but it would appear from the general research that those with intellectual disabilities are actually more vulnerable than young children. But then again, looking at specific groups, those children with intellectual disabilities are arguably the most vulnerable online. And then a brief discussion on the elderly, because I feel like I'm definitely running along with time. Benjamin Morrison carried out a lot of research and several literature reviews on this concept of vulnerability of older adults online. And sort of across his research, he found that the threats to the elderly online are slightly different to those with intellectual disabilities and indeed young children. So, for example, the focus was they were more likely to be victims of various different cyber crimes and cyber attacks, specifically phishing attacks and financial scams. So the vulnerability of the elderly seems to become exposed through levels of distrust of the internet, which makes them more likely to seek help from others, according to Jiang, which then puts them at a sort of a more vulnerable position because they are relying on others to help them with various different stuff. So they're potentially oversharing private information and sort of personal information that then can lead to more people sort of scamming them out of money, which then leads to this sort of financial aspect that I mentioned. And actually further research into the vulnerability of older adults shows that after retirement, the elderly are more likely to they have feelings of isolation and loneliness because they're no longer socializing every day with work colleagues and stuff. So their social involvement decreases rapidly, and they find themselves becoming more internalized and, you know, more alone. But then this is because of struggle because the older population tend to have lower levels of digital literacy than younger populations, which then means that they don't really understand what they're doing online, which can kind of frustrate them. And evidence suggests that when they become frustrated, they then detach from the internet completely, which then actually increases their level of isolation and loneliness, which then can deal with and also negatively impact their self-esteem, which then runs into issues of their well-being and negative impacts like that. So for the elderly, I actually think the most important thing, then probably arguably not as vulnerable as those with intellectual disabilities and children, just because of the complexity surrounding how we can protect those groups online. Whereas with elderly, I actually think it's purely about education. But when we educate them, maybe educating them in a more social environment so that they're making up for the isolation they're feeling, you know, from no longer working and interacting with people on a daily basis, as well as teaching them how they can avoid scams, what they can do to protect themselves. And so that kind of just leads me back to this idea of, is this protective narrative helpful online, to sort of see.
If you don't mind, I think we've run a bit out of time, but people can
No
check the
worries.
videos through the slides. But that was really interesting. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, it's a subject we could talk about forever.
Yeah, I know. I had so much to say. I was trying to run through it as quickly as possible.
No, that's really good.
So yeah, sorry about that. But yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get them to Mimi too, and we can answer those later. Thank you very much. So our third speaker. Hello, Andrew. How are you?
Hello. Is that working?
Yes, it is working. And look, thank you for coming in at such short notice. We're having a bit of technical problems with the next speaker. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for inviting me, Phil. This is I'm Andrew Elliott. I'm from DCMS, Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. I'm the Deputy Director for Cybersecurity. So my responsibilities involve supporting cyber innovation across the UK, cyber skills, and cyber regulation. I think I won't bore you with the detail about all the different programs that we run on all of those fronts, but we are busy trying to support innovators across the UK in all regions of the UK to develop their cyber products, grow their businesses. We're particularly interested in technologies which will be transformative in their nature, particularly sort of hardware and dealing with the underlying vulnerabilities in the technology, which is generally exploited so often in the many different cyber attacks that we see. Our skills programs are largely focused on trying to tackle the cyber skills gap in the UK, and it's probably worth saying that actually I think on cyber skills, it's one of those terms, isn't it, like digital skills, which can mean so much and means a different thing to everybody else. So I think a lot of what we've just heard in the last presentation about how do we actually help protect young people and older people who may be vulnerable online are probably not what I would call sort of technical cyber skills. That's more the kind of sort of awareness about cyber threats and risks that we all face as individual citizens that really everybody needs to have. And my department is certainly worried about that as well. We have a whole program of work around online safety and how do we actually raise awareness of these issues across the whole population. Whereas my particular responsibility is ensuring that organizations in the UK are equipped with the right skills to be able to protect their networks and protect their operations against the hostile threats out there in the world.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Andrew. I just wanted to bring you on for a couple of minutes. I wanted to say how great it is. I think that central government and the regions are working closely together It's fantastic to see you here. So thank you very much. Can I bring Alex back then, please? I think we've got our slides working.
As Phil said, I'm Alex Craig. I'm a partner at Muckle, which is one of the commercial law firms in Newcastle. And I saw this topic this afternoon in this panel discussion. I thought it was quite appropriate and quite timely to talk a little bit about what's known as the Age Appropriate Design Code, or otherwise known as the Children's Code, because it has just ended its transitionary period, so its implementation period having come in last September, and on the 2nd of September this year, it is in force, in place, and is something that anybody who is involved in provision of online services that are accessible by children will have to bear in mind at the design stage. So I was quite interested in what Mimi was saying just before there. One of her quotes was that online risk to children is due to human design. Well, this is all about design. It's very much from the personal data management perspective. It's not I think we've already covered the fact that, you know, there's no one answer to all of this. It's about education, it's about design, it's about how we approach everything. And the solution, I think somebody said in the chat, the solution is not to simply take devices off children. It's about management and support in use, and trying to help children in their use of online provision, and also in a way that's appropriate for their age. And I think actually we've just talked about the other end of the spectrum, which is the elderly, and there's probably a piece around there's probably age appropriate design there too. But the law, you know, the law is slow. I don't think anybody can pretend that it isn't. The law is usually behind technology, but the regulator, the Information Commissioner, who regulates around data protection, is addressing some of these sorts of issues head on, in my view. So just a bit of terminology, if anybody's not familiar with, when I'm talking about the ICO, I'm talking about the Information Commissioner's Office, the regulator around data protection, and who enforces the UK GDPR as it's now known, and the Data Protection Act 2018, just in case you don't know that context and that terminology. But essentially, this is all about children's personal data, its use, recognizing its value as an asset, but its vulnerability as well. Can I have the next slide, Claire? So as I say, the code, it came in after its transition period on the 2nd of September this year. It applies to what are known as information society services, so providers of services which are likely to be accessed by children, and its aim is to protect children's personal data. It sets out 15 standards, which I'm going to chat through, but they're not, they're sort of a steer or a sort of a signposting rather than a ban or a kind of very strict interpretation. So it's meant to assist with those in this area in thinking about how they actually do design their services. The code is the first of its kind. It's got quite a lot of traction. So internationally, the US Senate and Congress have called upon the major US tech and gaming companies to voluntarily adopt the standards in the ICO's code for children in the US. In Ireland, preparations are being made to introduce what they're calling the Children's Fundamentals, which is to protect children online. And the ICO, this is not the code's written and that's it. It's going to be a continuing area of focus for them, and it's already reportedly impacting on providers like Facebook, Google, Instagram, and TikTok, with some of them having already made adjustments in light of the code and what it puts forward, because the code is fundamentally based on the premise of having the best interest of the child at the kind of very heart of what you're doing, and reflects the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in particular, the right to be safe from commercial exploitation, the right to be protected from abuse when they interact with others, the right to have access to a wide range of information and media, and the right to play. So that's what the basis of this code is. Can I have another slide, please? Next slide. So as I say, there are 15 standards that are set out in the code. The first is the best interest of the child. As I say, this concept that this is the #1 consideration that has to be at the heart of everything when you're designing and developing online services. The second is data protection impact assessments, which is a term that is familiar to anybody who's involved with data protection at all. But basically, the idea is that you undertake what's essentially a risk assessment. So you look at the processing, you consult if necessary, you assess necessity and proportionality, you identify and assess risks that may arise from the processing, and you look at measures that you might use to mitigate those risks before you then decide to progress whatever it is further. Age appropriate application, obviously this is a critical standard. You've got to think about your audience. So it may be that you didn't originally plan for your platform to be used by children, but that is what's happening. So you need to make sure that you address that. It may be that you're targeting very young children, or you may be targeting teenagers, but you need to think about, okay, well, what's appropriate in that case for that age range? And the ICO has got suggested age ranges on their website, and it gives examples of what you might want to think about, what might be appropriate, and how you might engage with that particular audience. The next standard is around transparency, and again, this is something that's at the heart of data protection legislation. So it's the concept of being clear and open and transparent and honest about what you're going to do with somebody's personal data, and making sure that the privacy information you give to them is absolutely clear about that. Then it goes on and looks at detrimental use of data. So obviously, the key thing here is that children's data should not be processed in a way that's detrimental to their health or well-being. And then anybody involved in this area should be looking at their policies and community standards and adhering to those. So not just writing them and then not adhering to them, writing them and sticking to them, but making sure that they're enforced and they're clear to their users. And then, of course, the default setting. So, I mean, we all know about this. I know about this as well. We all know that there are default settings. And I mean, how many people listening today will have just gone, yes, fine, when it's the cookies notice jumps up on the screen and you just want to get on a website and you just, yes, fine. But from a child's perspective, the concept and understanding, depending on their age, will vary massively. And also, as Mimi says, depending on the vulnerability and the intellectual capacity of the child. So the general rule of thumb under the code in terms of personal data is that the default settings must be set to high, and that must be the default position, because generally a child will just accept that default setting. If you can move to the next slide, please. So the 8th standard is around data minimization. So this is the concept of only using the amount of data and only processing the data that you really do need to process for the child to receive the service that they're expecting to receive. And that might not be the whole of your service. It might just be a part of it. So you need to be able to break down what your core service is and whether there are additional services around that to adjust and make sure that the processing, so the quantity of data that you're processing is actually appropriate, and you're not taking more than you actually need. So it's basically what's adequate, relevant, and limited to what's necessary for what you're actually doing. Next slide, please. Somebody's just commented, I didn't see who it was, just about terms and conditions. This is not so much about terms and conditions. This is about when you're actually creating the service. And it's about thinking about, well, in the design phase, what can we do to actually address all of these different things? The terms and conditions that you refer to in the privacy policy are relevant, and you do need to have a very good think about how you convey terms and conditions in terms of use, and privacy policy is particularly when you're dealing with a vulnerable audience or a child. But this is about, before that, it's when you're right at the start of the journey and you're designing, what typically has happened to date, you know, the internet was for adults, and it's 1 in 5 of the internet's users are children. So we've got to address that. And this code is about, well, actually, in terms of what happens when somebody's using a site or a platform, well, generally they will be sharing a certain amount of personal data. It might not be very much, but in Lucy's example, it was video footage of her daughter. So, you know, what is appropriate then, and what parameters should be set, and should there be variances? And it's sort of retrospective and backward looking in some respects as to, well, what has happened to date and what things are not good. And if we're producing this service here and we take all of these things into account, then how can we make sure that it is more appropriate? Sorry, that was a bit of a digression. Data sharing is the 9th standard. So this is about thinking about if there's going to be any sharing of data. Now, the general rule of thumb is that if it's children's data, it should really only be being shared, whether that's within a group of entities or with a third party, if it's for very narrow reasons indeed. So safeguarding, prevention of child sexual exploitation, prevention of abuse online, to prevent or detect crimes against children, is really they're the real circumstances where there might be justifiably some sharing. But if there's going to be some sharing, you need to really interrogate why that's actually necessary. It might be appropriate if there's like an educational app, for example, that routes and shares data with a school, or an emergency situation, as I said. But you know, you've got to think about the vulnerability of the individuals using the actual service and whether the sharing is actually appropriate. And actually, you know what, if we actually interrogate quite a lot of this use, you probably don't need to do all of the things that might have happened to date. Next slide, please. The 10th standard is around geolocation. So anybody who's a parent will know all about the apps that enable you to see where your kid is. So when they're meant to be at home and they're actually at the co-op buying some sweets, that sort of thing. But again, the principle around geolocation is, you know, this is a child's location, and that data about the child could quite easily get into the wrong hands, could be abused, it could increase risks of abduction, trafficking, all sorts of things. So actually, unless the service, its core use is actually some kind of map style app, so the main function is to actually give directions, where obviously you wouldn't want to be preventing the geolocation. Generally, otherwise, then there shouldn't be any location data being processed. So again, it's going back to what the core premise of the actual service is, and otherwise there shouldn't be use of a child's location data. And you should, if there are additional services, then you need to think about, well, you know, is it appropriate to ask them whether they want that information or not, and how are we going to do that, and does it depend on the age of the child and the competency of the child. Next slide, please. Most cookie notifications are unhelpful. I don't disagree with you, whoever posted that. I think there's a whole debate at the moment about cookie notifications, and actually the government are looking at reviewing that whole piece, because as I said before, I think most people merrily ignore all of it and then wonder why we're getting all sorts of contacts about all sorts of different things. So next standard is parental controls. So again, if you're involved in the development side and you're designing something, you need to think about parental controls from both ends of the spectrum. So on the one hand, enabling time limits, restricting internet access to certain sites. I think we've already mentioned that in some of the previous speakers' sessions. Making sure that the child knows that parental controls are in place, because at the end of the day, a child has as much rights to its personal data being protected as an adult, that it doesn't matter that it's a child, they've got the same rights. So they should know that mummy, daddy, guardian, whoever has got some level of control, and the ICO suggests that that's relevant up to about the age of 12. and how that information is conveyed might be in a very, very different way. So it might be a lot more illustrative, and maybe with infographics and video and that sort of thing, than it might be if you get to a teenage age, where there might be more written material that might be used at that stage to help them understand what's going on. And also there needs to be a shift, because we need to respect this. So in some respects, what Mimi was talking about, we need to respect that once the child develops, then they start being able to make their own decisions, generally, not always, but generally, and actually they need to understand how they might be in control of the situation, and how their parents may be involved. But there's a bit more of a balance to achieve at that stage. And there absolutely needs to be clear, obvious signposting that if there's monitoring or tracking, that is what's happening. None of this is particularly easy, by the way, but this is what the code is sort of supporting organisations with, by saying these are the things that you really do need to have a really good think about. Next slide, please. Profiling. General position in the code is that profiling should be off as default. So profiling under the data protection legislation is the kind of automated processing of personal data to analyse or predict aspects of that person's performance or behaviour or whatever. So generally that should be off. It's not appropriate for children. Generally, I suspect as the child gets older, if you're looking at the higher age levels, then that might be less of an issue, but that's the general position around profiling. Next slide, please. And then the last three aspects of the code talk about nudge techniques, connected toys and devices, and online tools. So nudge techniques, so this is, you know, how you suddenly find yourself on another site, you're not quite sure why you ended up there. So the directioning that goes on, and there's an example on the screen there. So you know, the steer that you're getting to head towards and go and look at something else, that nudging generally in relation to children in particular, but it's viewed as not really being in line with data protection legislation and fair, lawful and transparent processing. But then there is also a recognition in the code that actually there are circumstances where it might be appropriate to nudge a child towards something that might help them with their mental health and well-being. So it's not saying, as I said before, it's not saying there's an outright ban, but generally it might not be appropriate to use that sort of technology. And then it goes on to talk, as I say, about connected toys and devices. And obviously we've got all sorts of things that children have now that enable them to personalize their toys using the internet and apps, or obtain information about their physical activity, or use interactive devices at home. And the ISO sets out suggestions on how to ensure that they're conforming with the code, and that effective tools are used to enable that. And it goes on to talk about other tools that might be helpful to help children exercise their data protection rights. Next slide, please. And finally, having explained roughly what the code covers in terms of the standards or the kind of levels that people should be thinking about when they're working this area, if they're an information society service, then from a governance point of view, if you're one of these providers, then the ICO is saying, well, you need to have systems in place that enable you to demonstrate compliance with the code. The code isn't law as such, but it is it has been implemented on the back of the Data Protection Act 2018, and if the Information Commissioner's Office is investigating an organisation that's operating in this area, they will be looking at what you have done to demonstrate compliance with the code. So to ignore it would be the worst thing you could do. If you try and act so far as you can in accordance with it, and you have evidence to show that, then generally the ICO is going to be working with you rather than against you. If you've literally just buried your head in the sand and ignored the whole thing, then that's not going to go very well if somebody does complain and the ICO does investigate. So an information society service should have systems in place that enable them to show that compliance. They should have an accountability program. They should have policies that support and demonstrate compliance with the legislation, as I said before. They should have staff training in place so that people understand why they're doing all these things, and they should have proper records. It's all very good, like deciding to do something during a development journey but not recording it. You've got to actually be able to have that record of how you've reached that conclusion, so that you can provide that in the event that you need to. Next slide, please. And I suppose people may say, well, what? So what? So what? It's not law, so what? Well, at the end of the day, it's not law as such, but it has come about as a result of the Data Protection Act 2018. The regulator will be looking to enforce it and make sure it's being adhered to. It's got the notice of various organisations internationally because it's the first of its kind, and it's right in amongst this whole debate that we're having today about security and protecting the more vulnerable individuals in our society. So you can't really just ignore it, I don't think. And in terms of non-compliance, you just straight into the sort of thing that the ICO would do if somebody was not adhering to the legislation, because these elements of the code are fundamentally embedded in the data protection legislation itself. So if you don't comply with the code, it's likely that you're not complying with the legislation. So one way or another, the ICO is going to be interrogating and looking at this particular arena. And they have quite strong powers. They can provide assessment notices, warnings, enforcement notices. They can issue penalty notices, and their fines, which at the end of the day is what's put data protection on the map, as they say, their fines are substantial. Top end, it's 20 million euros or 4% of annual worldwide turnover, whichever is higher. So it's not something that can be ignored. I appreciate it's very much just a small part of what we're talking about today, but I thought it was helpful to put in context what's happening on the regulatory side, certainly around personal data, and to give you that overview. And that's the end of my slot.
That was really, really useful. Thank you very much. And I think
Pleasure.
actually hearing to what you're saying, those 15 standards within the code are actually good checklists to show the vulnerable things that that vulnerable people are going to be affected by. Checking where they are, checking what they're doing, checking where they're being pushed to. That's a really useful list to go back and say, there you go. It was a bit Pirates of the Caribbean, where it's not actually a law, it's just a
Well, it's not law, but as I say, it's embedded. The legislative piece is embedded in the code. So whilst it itself is not the law, it's got the Data Protection Act and UK GDPR sitting right behind it. So if you're not following the code, it's likely that you would not be following the legislation. So
okay, but that's I'm going to have to move on. We're running about 10 minutes late, but
sorry,
it's not your fault, it's mine for overpacking it. I'm really excited to hear it. We're going to run on for another 10 minutes. If you don't mind, people can stay if they wish. Next up, I'd like to bring up Dawn, who's going to host the conversation. But I just want to mention that we've strayed into quite a few ethical issues here, and it's NIBE, the North East Initiative on Business Ethics, is one of our co-sponsors for today. Cybersecurity is a real ethical issue, between the balance between individual rights and what companies can and cannot do. And that's what we're going to talk about, Dawn. Are you there?
That actually is the best cybersecurity, isn't it? Just keep yourself on mute all the time, at all times. It'd be really nice, I think, if we've got the bandwidth for the other speakers to show themselves as well as now put their videos on as part of this conversation. I think that was really helpful from Alex to look at some of the legislation around trying to protect children from a legal sense. We've heard about the informal protection that can be put in place by parents, by schools, and with the help of the police. But the big thing that I am seeing here is that I used to have this sort of half jokey catchphrase of trust nobody, but actually this just seems to be becoming more and more relevant. And I think to me, this is what's sad. I can remember I used to play a game as children where you would fall back and the person behind would catch you. And it was to develop trust between children and their friends and those groups. Is that bad now? Do we actually say to kids, trust nobody? At the very beginning of this, I have already learned the name of Lucy's daughter. You will all know how old she is now. You'll know where she lives, and you'll know that she has an account on Roblox. And that was just in a 2-second introduction. There could be somebody sitting in this group that's got the link from somewhere. We just don't know. I want to throw that in and have a discussion around how we protect children, if it's important to develop trust, and where it all fits together. Yes, it's got to be a combination of everything, but actually, even in what Alex was saying, this legislation is for sort of EU-based countries. We have got different cultures. We're in a global society now. We've got different cultures all over the world. We've got cultures where, people can get married when they're 12 years old. How does that apply to, for example, people who may be predatory on the internet? We've got things that are acceptable to some parents and they're not acceptable to others. If there's neglect going on in society or neglect going on in the household, will they care if that legislation is in place? So I'm gonna shut up now, but actually I would invite Jonathan to perhaps open this discussion, Jonathan, and how the police try and get hold of what seems to be just such a nebulous concept of trying to protect everybody, but particularly children, because they are inherently curious. It's how they learn.
Yeah, a case of, as you rightly saying, I think I mentioned it earlier, is I feel as though that everything that we do from a physical world point of view, we also do from a digital point of view. Are the teams big enough? Well, it's a hard one to say that we can't go after everyone. How do we protect them online? There's groups out there, a case of there's things that we're doing in the police that really I can't go into, but the police are doing things to protect people. But we do go into schools, that a case of we giving advice and guidance, telling them about the risks, safeguarding and things like that. So they are doing things, but for me, it's got to start from home, because they're already children are already using technology long before they go into schools, and the police would get that opportunity to engage with them, giving them that preventative message, and the risks are already there. We are doing things, but I think what you were saying earlier about, well, do we tell them not to trust anyone? I think the quote from the KG, I always feel a bit strange saying this one, is it's not about not trusting people, but the quote from Chernobyl from the KGP is trust but verify. So if they're doing things, okay, you might be able to add a friend on the games that they're playing on. So if they're on the Xboxes or anything like that, is they can add the friends, but they're making sure that actually they're speaking to them and they recognize that voice and all those little things.
It's the journalist thing of trust your sources, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah. I like that. I like the trust no one as a default, but what I said before was, and this is what I try to instill in my daughter, trust your gut, which is what I said before, in terms of if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And it is about picking up on those little nuances and subtleties. That's very hard to teach, and it's got to be that repetitive thing. But I agree with what Johnny's saying. It needs to start at home, and it needs to be.
How do you incentivize that?
Exactly,
so,
that's the problem.
It's kind of, we heard Mimi talking and quoting several sources about older adults. There seemed to be an assumption there that it was adults who were doing the scamming. It doesn't take kids very long to realize that they can be rewarded financially scamming their peers.
You made a good point as well, that Betsy, for example, is looking at people on TikTok and Instagram making millions and millions of pounds, and they can buy whatever they want, and they want to be like that, and they want to be the online celebrities. It's really hard. I would not like to be growing up in this day and age, I have to say. I think it's really tough. But I think Jonny's right, it's got to start from, I like what Jonny said earlier on about the way he teaches his kid is, if it's not appropriate to show me face to face, then it's not appropriate to look at it online.
But how much did we all keep from our parents?
Yeah, exactly.
In order to learn.
But the case of, and I mentioned earlier about treating it almost like the physical world, you don't incentivize your children to look both ways before crossing the roads. You don't incentivize them not talking to strangers. It's just a message that we give all children straight away. We instinctively know that our parents taught us that, and we then teach our children that, and you would think they teach their children that, but it's that honest opinion. And I'm not asking everybody to own up to it, but we say this is what we should be teaching our children, and we should be telling them about the risks of online. How many people actually do it because they don't understand it themselves, or it's just like, well, there's the technology, you know how to use it, just crack on. If people have that honest opinion, thought in their own head, do I sit down with my children and speak about the risks online? What do they think about the risks? What do I think the risks are? How can we deal with that? And that is what I strongly believe should happen. And then hopefully we have those conversations about cybersecurity risks with our children, and then they have risks that talk with their children and so forth, because it is going to change, and the risks that they see are going to be different to what we know about now.
Thanks, Jonathan. I was just going to ask Mimi there, when she was doing this research, did you actually speak to any young people during the course of this?
No, I didn't really have much of a chance, unfortunately. I sort of went off my own experiences and sort of all the various studies that I'd found on this particular topic. And it was really interesting because a lot of what I read obviously was from an adult's perspective and what they thought was best for children, and very few studies were based on what children thought was best for them, or like how they would approach it if they came across inappropriate content online, etc. And quite a lot of children said that they would instantly tell a parent if they came across something that they found particularly scarring or damaging to themselves. But then on the other hand, a lot of children didn't want to risk their parents sort of coming in with parental controls and limiting what they could do and access online.
Which Stuart's actually just raised in the chat there, and I think that's very key. It's Pandora's box with a big label saying, "Do not open this box." What do you want to do then?
Yeah.
Do you want to open it, don't you?
I mean, exactly. It's so hard, but I think the second you open up the discussion is when you also run the risk of going forward, children not being as open and honest with you, because they don't want you to have that like complete influence over their life, if that makes sense. Because for children nowadays, and even, you know, I'm sort of 23, and even for most of my friends, we live a lot of our lives online, and we get so much influence from what we see online that I think we kind of become detached sometimes from reality, but we don't like being told that we can't access things online and we can't like do the stuff that we're used to doing online. So I think it becomes quite hard, because then you run the risk of children sort of almost rebelling, as it were. But instead of, whereas for, you know, maybe when I was younger, rebelling would be, I don't know, going to my friend's house and my mum said I had to come home from school. Whereas now I think it's posting something on TikTok or Instagram that maybe you shouldn't post because it could influence you and impact you and put you actually at risk in later life.
So I was going to say, one of the problems is it's about, you're all talking about being preventative, and I suspect one of the big problems is that we are reactive. So I didn't start talking to my daughter about this until something had happened, and everyone's like, I'm not going to get scammed. People don't think that they're going to get scammed until they get scammed, and then it becomes this very reactive, we need to do something about it, and just put loads of blocks on it. It's that education and messaging piece that needs to happen beforehand. That's the difficult bit. And you're right, I get what you were saying earlier about influencing people, but also what Jonny said, it's about getting the messaging right, and it's got to be as simple and basic as look left and right before you cross the road. It's got to be part of that. Look left and right before you go online.
But it's also, sorry,
Alex.
No, I was just going to say it's engagement as well, because I think that's right. There's a lot of commentary on the subject, but I don't know how much has been done in actually engaging with children of different ages, and also generationally to talk about, because we've got just such a problem at the moment, I think, because it's all gradually washing through. So as Jonathan was talking about, you don't incentivize your child to cross the road. Yes, but we all know we don't cross the road because of experience and what's happened. Whereas the problem is, a lot of us, even Lucy was sort of saying, well, actually, I'm in tech, but do I know absolutely everything about this platform that my daughter's on? Well, probably not. She probably knows more than me. And that's the challenge, I think, because I think they do know more. So we've got to somehow harness, I think, some of that so that we end up with services and provision that's appropriate. And I think that all of that needs to feed in to all the different parts of infrastructure, whether it is regulation or otherwise, so that you've got the whole. But I don't think it can be just dictated to by adults, particularly older ones whose own use of online platforms is awful quite often.
And I think Jenny has a very valid point in the chat there, that children and young people need to influence the design of this. But I also think that, is it a matter of time before there will be small self-regulating groups that perhaps don't engage in the same way? So, for example, there's a lot more use of online educational tools now, that if somebody decides to put some subliminal messaging into educational tools, how do you control that? How do they? I think Jonathan will probably accept to some extent that very often those that have got bad intentions are 2 steps ahead.
The case of, it's not everyone with bad intentions are 2 steps ahead. Sometimes you do find them where a case of the 2 step behind and they think they're not going to get caught, and they do. But whether or not we are talking about people who are doing bad people online, whether or not that's cyber-enabled crime, cyber-dependent crime, it's not something that we're going to be able to arrest our way out of, because unlike traditional and crimes such as, say, burglaries or anything like that, the offenders have to be in a specific location, so you can have people who can target them. But obviously with the cyberspace, the offender, the bad guys, could be anywhere in the world. So whether or not that is a criminal trying to get access to their accounts, whether or not that's trying to groom them or anything like that, they could be anywhere. And there's a lot more ways where they can hide their identity online. So yes, the companies can do things from a technical point of view to put safety measures in place. We can investigate. There is techniques that we use, sort of thing, to identify criminals, and we can arrest them. But we're not going to be able to solve all that problem. It has to come down, and it's not just the single solution, but education has to be the big part of it.
Which is just, it's essentially, Andrew Elliott has just said this, and he will see that at DCMS, that actually you've got to all keep talking to each other, that communication is key. And actually, even if it is a case of you just kick the can down the road, so that actually when the child is exposed to malevolent forces, they are in a better position to be able to cope with it. So an 8-year-old is a lot less able to cope with things than an 18-year-old. They are both, still young people, but actually if we can make them aware from a very early age, then surely that, everybody working together gets that message across.
I think also we need to remember in this discussion that for every child has a completely different personality and approach to life. And in the same way as when I was younger, and it might have been naughty to go into the newsagents and have a little look on the top shelf, showing my age, there will be the children who would go and seek that out, and there will be the children who don't. And it's the same, I think it's the same with the internet. There will be children who actively go and seek it out, regardless of what measures are put in place, and there will be children who don't. And that's the same. It's just the platform's different, that's all.
Yeah, me. And actually I think in class, the naughty children were very often the more intriguing ones, weren't they? You wanted to know what they wanted, but I always wanted to know what they were doing, but I watched from a distance. But I think that's also the danger, that the internet provides this false distance.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think that you're involved, but actually you are getting drawn in. Again, what you said, Alex, it leads you down. I start to do a bit of work, an email pops up, I answer that from a friend, I've been distracted, I then start clicking on the internet. Before I know what I'm doing, I've bought a pair of shoes. I mean,
Yep.
did that even
Absolutely.
So, it's kind of like, it's not just for children, it's not that temptation. They might do in-game purchases that's leading to exposure of their parents' financial details, but equally you could go the other way around, where somebody could go through the not adult channels, but I was going to say through other channels that are used by adults, for example, whether that's home security measures, and then get access to the children through that. So actually the bad guys have got many different intentions as well. There is not one bad intention. There is not one, type of child. It has to absolutely be a holistic approach. I'm just reading something that Stuart's talking about here, that I mentioned, the subliminal message, child safety measures, and environmental messages. Again, they could be, parents might think their kids are looking on very innocent information, as the children might, and then this stuff comes up there. One thing, if we go around and just say, this is putting you all a little bit on the spot, but just if kind of, I'm aware that we've run over, but if I asked each of you just one thing that you think you could do to try and make things better from your perspective, because you're all very different individuals here. We've got Jonathan, who you're hardened exposure to the criminal world, Jonathan, and we've got Mimi at the other end that's actually just coming out of university and looking at academic research. So a very different way of contributing to this overall protection of the next generation. I'm going to start with you, Lucy, because you have been scammed. What's the one thing that you could do?
I think for me it's about having more of these discussions, and like I said before, we never thought about it until it happened to us. And it's about being more prepared for it, and just having kind of honest and open discussions about what's going on.
And looking over Betsy's shoulder all the time.
You can't constantly look over someone's shoulder. And like I said, if I block around my computer in the house, she'll just go to someone else's house. So you can't do that. So for me, the education piece is fundamental. But you're right, what you're saying, it's got to be holistic, and there's no one quick fix answer to this at all. It's a very complex problem.
Jonathan, from a personal point of view, not a policing point of view, from a personal point of view?
Yeah, from a personal point of view, just to reiterate Lucy's saying, case it's those conversations, that's the key. But I think what we've identified when we've been speaking today is, when we're talking about cybersecurity for children, I think we've got to be a bit more specific than saying cybersecurity, because it's like saying, how do we protect children in a physical world? There's so many things that we're trying to protect them from. It's specifically, what are we trying to protect them from at that in this single discussion, not overall, and what age range, because again, we've identified that the advice and guidance and the way we approach cybersecurity with children, say age 5 to 7, compared to those in the 16 to 18 bracket, are going to be very, very, very different. So I think when we are thinking about cybersecurity for children and young people, we need to be specific about what area of cybersecurity and what age range or bracket of children that we're speaking about.
Thanks, Jonathan. Alex, from your point of view, you can actually say this from a legal point of view. If you think
Professionally or personally?
And do you know what? I'm going to go for professionally for you, because there's legally, it's a very interesting scenario, isn't it? Stuart's actually said that, are we looking at it, perhaps catastrophizing it, because maybe 99% of activity is good, but actually it's like 99% of cars go past. If that one car hits you, you could be dead. So yeah, from a legal point of view, is there anything that you think
I think from a legal point of view, we've got to be quite active in some of the consultations. I think so. I think maybe we need to engage a bit more with the consultations around some of the pre-legislative discussions, I would say, because you can comment and kind of make observations on some of the developments, particularly around data protection. So probably that's.
Okay, thank you. And Mimi, you are the closest thing that we've got to a young person here today. So yeah. By the way, but we know that we haven't long been out of university. So yeah, I'm going to leave the final.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it does depend on the age range that you are applying to, but I think using the platforms that children use themselves and the people that they look up to on those platforms to maybe help educate them. So for example, for me, I think maybe like if people paid TikTokers to maybe put out messages every now and again on their TikTok about what's safe and what's not, because that's how most people of the younger generation become influenced by those kinds of videos and those kinds of stuff. So I think getting people that they look up to tell them what's good and what's not might actually be quite an effective way of handling this going forward. Or it's one of many suggestions and many ways of doing this, but I think that could be one quite good approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Cut diamonds with diamonds. I knew there'd be something you see, an approach that you would think that I didn't think of. The last thing I thought of was social media influencers to influence the children. Phil, I'm going to hand back to you now to just kind of finish, but thank you everybody for this discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I think I've learned quite a lot today as well.
It's just been an amazing conversation. I think we could have gone on forever. So thank you very much for that, Dawn. And I think that was a very salient point from Mimi right at the end. Let's get those people who people look up to pass the messages on, and not old fuddy-duddies like myself. But that's the end of this event. Thank you very much. No people I've got to thank. Lucy and Jonny for stepping in at the last minute. Really good session going forward. Mimi, for all that work you've done in doing the investigation, some really interesting insights. And I think, Alex, that really is a template for us to look back and say, these are the things that are going to affect our children. So that's great. Andrew, stepping in, last minute, just tell us about the great work that DCMS is doing. It's really good to have you on board. And Dawn, thank you very much for holding that conversation together. And of course, Nide, for helping us to put this on around this whole issue around ethics and cybersecurity. Tomorrow is the final event. And it's in person. It's up in Newcastle, 6 till 8. There's beer and pizza. If you're around, please come and join us. If not, well, hopefully we'll see you next year. My final thanks go to Claire, who does a huge amount of work behind the scenes. Some of you saw earlier on. And finally, you for watching. Thank you very much.